Think about how a bridge gets built. Engineers don't just design it for sunny days and light traffic. They stress test it. They calculate what happens during earthquakes, floods, and overloaded trucks. They deliberately try to break their own design before real-world forces do it instead. Your life plan deserves the same brutal honesty. Ask yourself, have you ever seriously sat down and tried to destroy your own plan? Have you played devil's advocate against your own dreams? Have you imagined the 10 ways your assumptions could be completely wrong? If you haven't done this, your plan isn't a plan. It's a wish dressed in professional clothing. And wishes don't survive contact with reality. Only tested, questioned, and pressure-checked plans do. First principles thinking. Strip everything down to bare truth. What if everything you believe about your future is borrowed from someone else's experience, not your own reality? This is the trap almost nobody talks about. We build plans on top of assumptions, and those assumptions are built on top of other assumptions. And somewhere underneath all of that, nobody actually checked if the foundation was real. First principles thinking means you stop accepting inherited wisdom and start questioning everything from scratch. It's uncomfortable, it's time-consuming, and it's absolutely necessary if you want a plan that actually works when life gets difficult. Here's a simple example. Someone wants to start a business. Their plan says, I'll build an audience first, then sell a product. But why do they believe that sequence is correct? Because they heard it from a successful entrepreneur. But was that entrepreneur's situation identical to theirs? Did the same market conditions apply? Did they have the same resources, the same timing, the same audience psychology? When you strip away every assumption and ask, why is this actually true, you often discover that your plan is built on borrowed logic that doesn't apply to your specific situation. The most dangerous assumptions are the ones that feel so obvious, nobody thinks to question them. Challenge every belief in your plan. Ask, why do I believe this is true? At least 5 times for every major assumption. What survives that interrogation is real. What collapses was never solid to begin with. Build only on what survives. The pre-mortem. Kill your plan on paper before reality kills it in real life. What if the smartest thing you ever do is imagine your complete and total failure before you even begin? Most people do post-mortems. They analyze what went wrong after everything has already fallen apart. By then, the damage is done, the time is wasted, and the cost is already paid in full. But there's a far more powerful technique almost nobody uses. It's called the pre-mortem. And it works like this. Before you launch your plan, you close your eyes and you assume it has already failed completely. Not partially. Not a setback. Total catastrophic failure. Then you ask yourself one devastating question. What went wrong? This simple mental shift unlocks something extraordinary. Suddenly your brain stops defending your plan and starts attacking it. You see the blind spots you were too excited to notice. You identify the assumptions that were never tested. You discover the single points of failure that could collapse the entire structure. The reason this works so powerfully is because our brains are naturally optimistic about our own ideas. We fall in love with our plans. We protect them emotionally. The pre-mortem forces your mind to think like an enemy, and your enemies will always find the weaknesses your enthusiasm helped you ignore. Do this for every major plan. Write down 20 ways it could fail. Be brutally creative. Be ruthlessly honest. Every weakness you find on paper is a weakness you can fix before life exposes it at the worst possible moment. Variables versus constants. Know what you're actually controlling. What if you've been spending 90% of your energy trying to control things that were never in your control to begin with? This is perhaps the most energy-draining mistake intelligent people make. They build complex plans around variables they cannot control, and then they wonder why everything keeps falling apart despite their best efforts. In any system, whether it's a physics experiment, a business, or a life plan, there are constants and there are variables. Constants are the things you can rely on, the rules that don't change regardless of circumstances. Variables are factors that shift, fluctuate, and behave unpredictably regardless of how much you want them to stay still. Most people's plans treat variables like constants. They assume the economy will cooperate. They assume their health will hold. They assume key relationships will remain stable. They assume technology won't disrupt their industry. And when any one of those constants starts behaving like the variable it always was, the entire plan shatters. The correct approach is to build your plan around the variables, not against them. Design systems that can adapt when conditions change. Create multiple pathways to your goal so that if one route closes, others remain open. Reduce your dependency on any single variable that you cannot control. And most importantly, identify what you actually control. Your effort, your learning speed, your response to failure, your daily habits, these are your true constants. Build everything on them. Everything else is weather. Iterate, like a scientist. Embrace being wrong as rapidly as possible. What if being wrong faster is actually the secret to succeeding sooner? The entire modern culture of productivity tells you to commit to your plan, stay consistent, and push through. And there's wisdom in that. But there's also a hidden danger. What if you're pushing through in completely the wrong direction? Scientists don't celebrate being right. The best ones celebrate being proven wrong quickly, because that means they can correct their course before wasting years on a false hypothesis. Every failed experiment isn't a failure. It's information. It's data. It's the universe telling you something true about how things actually work. Your plan is a hypothesis. It's your best current guess about how to achieve a specific outcome given specific conditions. But like every hypothesis, it needs to be tested against reality as rapidly and as cheaply as possible. The goal isn't to prove your plan works. The goal is to discover whether it works as honestly and as quickly as you can. This means building feedback loops into your plan. Check in regularly. Measure actual results against expected results. When there's a gap, treat it as precious information, not as personal failure. The gap is telling you something real. Listen to it. The people who succeed long-term aren't the ones who had the best original plan. They're the ones who are willing to update their plans faster and more honestly than everyone else. Being wrong quickly, cheaply, and early is infinitely better than being wrong slowly, expensively, and late. The cargo cult trap. Are you doing the right things or just looking like you are? What if everything you're doing looks exactly like success but produces absolutely none of it? There's a fascinating phenomenon where people observe something that worked for someone else, copy all the visible behaviors, and then are genuinely shocked when the same results don't follow. They're doing everything right, except they fundamentally misunderstood why the original thing worked. This happens everywhere in life planning. Someone sees a successful entrepreneur who wakes up at 5 a.m., meditates, reads 50 books a year, and runs a profitable company. So they copy the 5 a.m. alarm, the meditation app, the book list, and nothing changes. Because the visible behaviors weren't the cause of success, they were symptoms of a particular mindset, built on a specific foundation, in a unique context that cannot be directly transplanted. Real understanding means knowing why something works, not just what it looks like. When you truly understand the mechanism behind a strategy, you can adapt it intelligently to your own situation. When you only copy the surface behavior, you're performing a ritual without understanding the underlying reality. Stress test your plan by asking this question about every element. Do I actually understand why this should work, or am I just imitating something that looked impressive? If you can't explain the mechanism in simple, clear terms, you don't own that piece of your plan. You're borrowing it blindly. Borrowed strategies break under pressure. Understanding survives everything. What if, right now, today, in this exact moment, everything you believe about your future is built on a foundation that has never once been tested against reality? What if the plan you've been protecting, nurturing, defending in arguments, and quietly whispering to yourself every night before sleep, what if that plan has a fatal flaw that you've never seen? Not because you're not intelligent enough to see it, but precisely because you are. What if your intelligence, your creativity, and your passion have been working against you this entire time? Building an elaborate, beautiful, emotionally satisfying structure that looks exactly like a plan but functions exactly like a dream. What if life isn't waiting for you to be ready? What if, right now, while you're feeling confident about your direction, reality is already preparing the specific test that your specific plan is least equipped to handle? What if the earthquake is already coming, and your bridge, the one you spent years designing, was never once pressure tested for anything harder than a sunny afternoon? Here is the most uncomfortable question I can ask you, and I'm going to ask it slowly so it lands completely. When was the last time you genuinely, seriously, with full intellectual honesty, tried to destroy your own plan? Not doubt it casually, not worry about it nervously at 2 a.m., but actually sit down with cold logic and complete courage and try to find every single way it could collapse? If you've never done that, then what you have isn't a plan. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share will change how you think about everything you're building. What if the biggest threat to your future isn't your competition, isn't the economy, isn't bad luck, isn't timing, but the unchallenged assumptions living quietly inside your own plan? That's where we begin. That's the real conversation. Most people plan the way they decorate a room. They arrange things to look good, to feel comfortable, to impress visitors. They choose colors that complement each other, furniture that fits the aesthetic, lighting that makes everything seem warm and inviting. And it works beautifully, right up until an earthquake hits, and you realize there was never a single structural wall in the entire building. Plans that have never been tested aren't plans. They're decorated rooms, they feel real, they look professional, they satisfy something emotional inside you that needs to believe the future is manageable. But when real pressure arrives, and it always arrives, decorated rooms collapse in ways that tested structures simply do not. Now here is where most people make their first critical mistake, and it's subtle enough that almost nobody catches it. They confuse thinking about their plan with thinking against their plan. Thinking about your plan means reviewing it, refining the language, adjusting timelines, maybe adding a new goal or two. It feels productive, it involves your plan, but it never once challenges whether the fundamental assumptions underneath that plan are actually true. Thinking against your plan is an entirely different and far more valuable exercise. It means becoming your own most rigorous critic. It means asking the questions your enthusiasm has been quietly suppressing. It means treating your own best idea the way a brilliant skeptical stranger would treat it, without emotional attachment, without the sunk cost of time already invested, without the identity protection that makes us defensive about our own thinking. The most dangerous belief in planning is this: I've thought about this a lot, so it must be solid. Thinking about something a lot and thinking about it correctly are two completely different things. You can spend years thinking intensely about something and never once ask the question that would reveal the fundamental flaw. Quantity of thought is not the same as quality of interrogation. So what does real interrogation look like? It starts with something simple and almost counterintuitive. Before you defend your plan to anyone else, you have to be willing to attack it yourself. Not half-heartedly, not with the comfortable attacks you already know how to answer, but with the hardest, sharpest, most inconvenient questions you can generate. Ask yourself, what is the single assumption in this plan that, if wrong, makes everything else irrelevant? Every plan has one. There's always one load-bearing assumption that everything else is built upon. Find it, name it specifically, write it down, and then ask the most important follow-up question you'll ever apply to your own thinking. How do I know this assumption is actually true? Not how do you feel it's true, not how does it seem true based on things you've heard, but how do you know with actual evidence, with tested experience, with real-world feedback, that this assumption holds up under pressure? Most people, when they do this honestly for the first time, discover something deeply unsettling. The central assumption of their plan has never been verified. It was inherited from someone else's experience, or it was borrowed from conventional wisdom, or it was simply felt so strongly that it was promoted directly to obvious truth without ever passing through the verification stage. And here's what makes this genuinely shocking. You can be exceptionally intelligent and still make this mistake. In fact, highly intelligent people sometimes make it more often because their minds are so good at constructing convincing internal arguments that they never feel the need to test against external reality. Intelligence without rigorous self-questioning is just a faster engine pointed in a potentially wrong direction. Let me give you a way to fix this. Take the core assumption of your current most important plan. Write it at the top of a blank page. Then write this question: why do I believe this is true? Write your answer. Then ask the same question about your answer. And again, and again. Do it 5 times. By the 5th why, either you've reached a genuinely solid foundation of verified evidence, or you've discovered that you were always standing on something much shakier than you ever realized. This is not meant to be discouraging. This is the most encouraging thing I can tell you, because finding a crack in your plan on paper today costs you nothing except a temporary bruise to your certainty. Finding that same crack after 2 years of execution costs you everything: time, money, energy, and sometimes the confidence to try again. Now let's talk about something that sounds morbid, but is actually one of the most powerful planning tools available to any thinking person. Imagine your plan has already failed. Not struggled, failed. Completely. Catastrophically. Whatever you were building is gone. The outcome you wanted did not happen. Now ask yourself with genuine curiosity, what went wrong? Notice what happens in your brain when you do this. Something shifts. When you're defending a plan, your mind works to minimize risks and maximize confidence. When you assume the plan has already failed, your mind suddenly becomes extraordinarily creative at identifying exactly what those risks were. You stop being a defense attorney and start being an investigator. And investigators find things that defense attorneys never wanted you to see. Write down everything that comes up, every vulnerability, every single point of failure, every dependency on factors outside your control. Every assumption that required someone else to cooperate, some external condition to remain stable, some piece of luck to arrive on schedule. Write them all down without filtering, without editing, without telling yourself that's unlikely before you've even examined it seriously. Because here is the uncomfortable reality about probabilities. We are extraordinarily bad at estimating them for our own plans. We systematically underestimate the likelihood of bad outcomes for ourselves and overestimate the likelihood of good ones. It's not stupidity, it's how minds are built. We are survival machines, and survival machines are supposed to be optimistic enough to try new things. But that optimism without a corrective mechanism creates blind spots that reality exploits at the most inconvenient moments. The corrective mechanism is deliberate, structured, systematic pessimism applied to your plan before you execute it. Not as a permanent mindset, but as a specific tool used at specific moments to find specific problems before they find you. Every weakness you identify in this exercise becomes something you can address. You can build redundancy. You can create backup pathways. You can reduce your dependence on any single point of failure. You can decide in advance how you'll respond to specific setbacks instead of figuring it out while you're already in crisis mode, and your best thinking is compromised by stress and fear. This brings us to perhaps the most important distinction in all of planning, the difference between what you control and what you don't. Most plans quietly, unconsciously treat things outside your control as if they were inside your control. They assume cooperative conditions, stable environments, predictable people. And then when those assumptions break, and they always eventually break, the plan has no mechanism for adaptation because it was designed for a world that only exists in optimistic projection. Your effort is yours to control. Your learning is yours to control. How you respond to unexpected obstacles is yours to control. How quickly you update your thinking when new information arrives is yours to control. Everything else, market conditions, other people's decisions, timing, luck, these are variables. Treat them as variables. Design your plan so that multiple variations of those variables can occur without destroying your entire direction. This means building in optionality, having multiple pathways toward the same fundamental goal. Not being so committed to one specific route that a blockage on that route means complete failure. The best plans aren't the most rigid ones. The best plans are the ones that can absorb unexpected reality and continue moving toward the essential destination, even as the specific path changes. And speaking of changing paths, let's talk about the relationship between being wrong and being smart. Here is something that took many brilliant people years to fully accept. Being wrong early and cheaply is a competitive advantage. It is not a mark against your intelligence. It is not evidence of poor planning. It is the mechanism through which you correct course before the cost of being wrong becomes catastrophic. Your plan is a hypothesis. Treat it exactly like one. A hypothesis is a best current guess, made with available information, designed to be tested and updated as new information arrives. The moment you stop treating your plan as a hypothesis and start treating it as a committed identity statement, you've introduced something deadly, the refusal to update. Updating your plan when reality gives you feedback is not inconsistency. It is not weakness. It is not giving up. It is the intelligent response to new information, and it is what separates people who eventually succeed from people who spend